The Long Island serial killer. Ugh, it's a name that just sends chills down your spine. A case that's haunted the true crime world for, gosh, over a decade. And for years, it felt like a puzzle with like missing pieces, leaving so many families just in agonizing limbo.
Yeah, it's a case that really gripped the public's imagination, and not just for the brutality of the crimes, but for the sheer mystery surrounding them. Who was this predator preying on the shadows of Long Island?
Mm.
And would they ever be brought to justice?
Well, there has been a major break in the case,
Right.
an arrest that brought a name and a face to this nightmare. Rex Heuermann. So we're going to take you deep into this labyrinthine case, all the way from the first unsettling clues to the moment Heuermann was finally apprehended.
And what's so fascinating is how this case, like so many others, started with a disappearance, a missing persons case that just seemed to vanish into thin air.
Yeah.
Poof.
The case of Shannon Gilbert back in 2010. She was working as a sex worker and was last seen in Oak Beach. That frantic 911 call she made, it's chilling. And sadly, it didn't lead to her being found.
That call it's key, though. You can hear the terror in her voice, but it's also chaotic, confusing. And add to the tragedy, the initial police response was woefully inadequate. We now know about the deep-rooted corruption within the police force that obstructed the investigation for years.
Ugh, it's infuriating, isn't it? The very people who were supposed to be seeking justice were actually hindering it. And what makes it even more heartbreaking is that Shannon's case, the one that sparked this whole investigation, remains officially unsolved.
That's right. But while Shannon's disappearance remains a painful question mark, it did lead to a grim discovery that would forever change the course of this investigation: the Gilgo 4.
In December 2010, just a few months after Shannon vanished, an officer training his dog along Gilgo Beach stumbled upon a set of remains. It was just the tip of the iceberg. 3 more bodies were found soon after, all young women in their 20s, all sharing a similar profile.
These first 4 victims, the Gilgo 4, were all petite, white, and worked as escorts, using the internet to connect with clients. The way their bodies were disposed of, that's what really struck investigators. They were placed close together, some bound with belts or tape, and a few were even wrapped in burlap.
It was like the killer was sending a message. But was it the work of one individual, or were there multiple predators operating in the area? That became a huge debate.
Yeah, the similarities in the Gilgo 4's disposal, especially the burlap, pointed towards a single perpetrator. But as the investigation expanded, things got more complex. More remains surfaced, some dating back to the 90s, and the victim profiles started to vary. That's where the multiple killer theory gained traction.
Right. We're talking about victims like Jessica Taylor, whose torso was found in 2003, years before her skull and hands showed up on Gilgo Beach. And then there's Valerie Mack, whose partial remains were found on the beach but linked to a torso discovered a decade earlier.
And this is where the concept of geographic clustering comes into play. It's a crucial element in serial killer investigations. Essentially, it refers to how the victims were found in close proximity, which often suggests a killer familiar with the area. In this case, the clustering initially pointed towards a single perpetrator, but as more victims were discovered, the wider geographical spread fueled the multiple killer theory.
And then there's the heartbreaking case of Peaches.
Peaches, yeah. Let's rewind the clock even further back to 1997. That's when Peach's torso was found in Hempstead Lake Park. Years later, those remains were linked to others found on Gilgo Beach. And to make this tragedy even more unbearable, the remains of a toddler were found nearby. DNA confirmed it was Peach's child.
It's horrifying to think this killer or killers operated with such impunity for so long. It's just mind-boggling. But amidst all this chaos and despair, a shocking truth emerged. Corruption within the very institution tasked with finding the truth.
Right. Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke was actively obstructing the investigation, keeping the FBI at bay, likely to protect his own illegal dealings. Think about that. The person in charge of finding these victims and bringing their killer to justice was actively sabotaging the process.
It's a betrayal on so many levels. And this corruption, this deliberate stalling, delayed justice for years, casting a long shadow over the entire case. But thankfully, in 2022, there was a shift. A new task force was assembled, a team of seasoned investigators, analysts, and forensic experts determined to finally crack this case.
This task force, unhindered by the corruption that had plagued previous efforts, took a fresh look at the evidence. They were laser-focused on uncovering the truth, no matter where it led.
And it's remarkable how quickly they made headway. In just 6 weeks, they had a lead that would break the case wide open. And it all started with a witness in the case of Amber Costello, one of the Gilgo 4.
Remember how most of the victims were sex workers who used the internet to find clients? Well, a key witness in Amber's case described a client she'd been in contact with before she disappeared. The description was incredibly detailed. A large white male, over 6 feet tall, with a stocky build, dark bushy hair, and those distinctive 70s-style glasses. The witness even said he looked like an ogre.
Whoa, that's a pretty vivid image. So how did they connect this ogre to Rex Heuermann?
The witness also remembered a crucial detail: a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche parked outside Amber's house. This was like striking gold for investigators. They meticulously tracked down the owner of that specific vehicle in 2010, Rex Heuermann, an architect living in Massapequa Park, a stone's throw from Gilgo Beach.
Heuermann fit the physical description, owned the vehicle, and lived close to the dumping ground. It was too much of a coincidence to ignore. But they needed more than just a physical match. They needed hard evidence.
This is where the investigation gets really interesting. They started digging into Heuermann's digital footprint, and what they found was incredibly incriminating. By analyzing burner phone records and cell tower data, they discovered calls made to the victims that were linked to Heuermann's location. It was a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading straight to him.
It's amazing how technology can be used to uncover the truth, even years after a crime.
Absolutely. And they uncovered fake online identities he used on sites like Tinder and AOL, names like Andrew Roberts and John Springfield. He used burner phones to mask his true identity, thinking he was being clever. But every click, every call left a trace.
And what were they finding in these online accounts?
Let's just say the content of his online activity was disturbing, to say the least. Investigators found searches related to sex work, sadistic pornography, and get this, he was actually searching for information about the Long Island serial killer case itself.
Wait, so he was actually searching for information about himself online? That's both audacious and, frankly, a bit stupid, isn't it?
You'd think so. He was practically leaving a digital confession, searching for updates on the very task force that was closing in on him. It's almost as if he couldn't help but be drawn back into the darkness of his own actions. But while the digital trail was damning, investigators knew they needed physical evidence to connect him directly to the victims.
Okay, so where did they find that crucial link?
They found it in the most mundane of places: his trash. You see, hairs found on 3 of the Gilgo 4 victims were carefully analyzed using DNA technology, which, had advanced in leaps and bounds over the years. These hairs were a match to Heuermann's wife.
Hold on, his wife. Does that mean she was involved?
It's highly unlikely. Heuermann's wife was out of town during the times of the killings. What's more plausible is that her DNA was transferred to the victims through shared items in the home, not direct involvement.
So it wasn't direct proof that Heuermann himself was at the crime scenes, but it placed him firmly in the crosshairs.
Exactly. This DNA connection provided that crucial link between Heuermann and the victims. But they needed that undeniable smoking gun, and they found it in a discarded pizza crust.
A pizza crust? Seriously?
Undercover detectives followed Heuermann and managed to collect a pizza crust he'd thrown away. They extracted DNA from the crust, and the results were conclusive. It matched a male hair found on one of the victims. That pizza crust sealed his fate.
So they had the witness testimony, the digital footprint, cell phone records placing him near the victims, and now DNA evidence from multiple sources. They had Heuermann cornered.
They had an airtight case. On July 13th, 2023, Rex Heuermann was arrested in Manhattan and charged with 3 of the 4 Gilgo Beach murders, with the 4th still under investigation. It was a major victory, a moment of relief for the families who had waited so long for justice.
So after years of mystery and dead ends, they finally had their man. But this was just the beginning of a whole new chapter.
That's right. Heuermann's arrest opened up a Pandora's box of new questions. Was he responsible for the other 6 victims found along Ocean Parkway? Were there even more victims out there? And what about Shannon Gilbert? Would they ever find the answers to what happened to her?
Yeah, it was a moment that really reverberated through the true crime community. This case, with its twists and turns, had captivated so many for so long, and now with an arrest made, the spotlight kind of shifted, to a new set of questions.
Right, like unpacking a Russian nesting doll, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You solve one layer of the mystery, and there's another one waiting underneath. And of course, there's the lingering question of Shannon Gilbert. Even with Heuermann behind bars, her disappearance continues to haunt this entire case.
Absolutely. And remember, Shannon's attorney, He's been a vocal advocate for her family, always maintaining that their death was no accident.
He never let up, did he? He was convinced there was more to this story, even suggesting the involvement of a female accomplice in the Long Island killings.
That's right. He's also spoken about receiving creepy phone calls, even mentioning a pizza delivery that he didn't order, which arrived shortly after a taunting call referencing pizza. He believes these calls are connected to the case, maybe even coming from the killer himself.
Wait, so he's getting prank pizza deliveries? That's both bizarre and incredibly unsettling.
Hey, Chia.
I mean, if those calls are legitimate, it adds a whole new layer of creepiness to this whole thing. Imagine being that attorney, constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering if you're the next target.
It's a chilling thought, isn't it? To be living under that kind of threat, never knowing who's watching or listening. And it speaks to the psychological impact this case has had on everyone involved, the families of the victims, the investigators, even those on the periphery, like Shannon's attorney. They've all been touched by this darkness.
And we can't forget the emotional toll on the families of the victims. Years of uncertainty, not knowing what happened to their loved ones, clinging to hope only to have that hope dashed time and time again. And then when they finally get an arrest, it opens up old wounds, brings back the pain of their loss.
It's like a wound that never fully heals. It scabs over, but underneath, the rawness remains. And with Heuermann's arrest, it's like that scab has been ripped off, forcing them to confront their grief all over again.
It's a reminder that these aren't just names in a case file. These were real people with lives, families, dreams. They were daughters, sisters, friends, and their stories were tragically cut short.
Exactly. And while the pursuit of justice is paramount, we can't lose sight of the human cost of these crimes, the ripple effect of grief and trauma that extends far beyond the victims themselves.
And it's a story that's still being written, right? I mean, Heuermann's behind bars, but the investigation is far from over. Investigators are still piecing together the puzzle, trying to determine the full extent of his crimes. There could be more victims out there, more families waiting for answers.
Yeah, there's a sense that this is just the beginning of a new chapter. Now that investigators have a face and a name, they can re-examine old cases, look for any connections they might have missed before. His travels to South Carolina, his timeshare in Las Vegas, these details suggest a wider scope of criminal activity that needs to be explored.
It's like they've finally caught the spider, but they're still trying to map out the entire web. And it makes you wonder what kind of person is capable of leading this double life. An architect by day, a serial killer by night. How do you reconcile those two realities?
It's a question that psychologists and criminologists will be grappling with for years to come. How could someone seemingly so ordinary be harboring such darkness within them? Was it a slow descent into depravity, or was there always a monster lurking beneath the surface?
It challenges our assumptions about who is capable of these horrific acts. It makes you realize that evil can wear a suit and tie, that it can blend seamlessly into the fabric of everyday life.
It's a chilling reminder that we never truly know what goes on behind closed doors in the minds of those around us. And it's a testament to the persistence of law enforcement, the tireless efforts of those who refuse to let this case go cold. The meticulous analysis of evidence, the pursuit of every lead, shows their unwavering commitment to seeking justice for the victims and their families.
And it proves that even in the face of setbacks, even after years of frustration and dead ends, the truth can prevail. But it also raises some uncomfortable questions about the systems that allowed these crimes to occur for so long.
You're right. We need to look beyond the individual perpetrator and examine the broader context that allowed this to happen. The police corruption that hampered the initial investigation, the societal attitudes towards sex workers that often lead to their cases being dismissed or marginalized, these are issues that demand our attention.
It's a reminder that the victims in this case, and in so many others like it, were often overlooked and dehumanized. Their profession made them targets, not just for violence, but for indifference from those who were supposed to protect them.
It's a heartbreaking reality that we need to confront. Sex workers are disproportionately vulnerable to violence, yet their cases are often treated with less urgency, less empathy, their lives are devalued, their stories dismissed. And that needs to change.
It's about recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of every individual, regardless of their profession or circumstances. It's about creating a society where everyone feels safe, protected, and valued, where no one falls through the cracks, where no one's story goes unheard.
It's about demanding accountability from those in power, supporting organizations that work with marginalized communities, and advocating for policies that protect the most vulnerable among us. It's a long and difficult journey, but one we must undertake together.
And as we delve deeper into the complexities of this case, we can't lose sight of that human element. The families who are still searching for answers, the victims whose lives were tragically cut short. Their stories need to be heard, their memories honored.
Absolutely. This case, with its twists and turns, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the world we live in. And as we move forward, it's crucial to remember that the pursuit of justice is not just about catching a killer. It's about creating a world where these kinds of horrors are no longer possible.
And that's a world worth fighting for. A world where everyone can live with dignity, safety, and respect. But it starts with recognizing that we all have a role to play, that we all have a responsibility to make that vision a reality.
It's about pushing for change, demanding better, and never settling for a world where these kinds of tragedies are allowed to happen. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the Long Island serial killer case, I want to leave you with a final thought. Now that the spotlight is on this case, we have a unique opportunity to use this momentum to make a real difference.
You're right. We can honor the memory of the victims by advocating for change, by working to prevent future tragedies. Yeah, it feels like this case is a wake-up call. You know, we can't just sweep these issues under the rug anymore. We need to confront them head on, challenge the systems that perpetuate this kind of violence.
Absolutely. We need to start by acknowledging that these victims were often marginalized and overlooked, not just by the killer, but by society as a whole. They were sex workers. And that stigma, unfortunately, often made them invisible, both to law enforcement and to the public.
It's like their lives were somehow considered less valuable, less worthy of protection. And that's a dangerous attitude because it creates a climate where predators can operate with impunity.
Exactly. When a certain group of people is dehumanized, it becomes easier to ignore their suffering, to dismiss their cries for help. And that's why it's so crucial to challenge those preconceived notions, to recognize that every life has value regardless of someone's profession or circumstances.
So what can we do? How do we create a world where these kinds of horrors are no longer possible?
Well, it starts with awareness, right? We need to educate ourselves about the realities of sex work, about the dangers these individuals face. We need to listen to their stories, amplify their voices, and advocate for their rights.
And we need to hold those in power accountable. We need to
Sure.
demand better from law enforcement, from our justice system, from our elected officials. We need to push for policies that protect the most vulnerable among us, not just in word, but in deed.
Yeah, and we can support organizations that are working on the ground, providing resources and support to sex workers. We can donate our time, our money, our voices to these efforts.
This case has brought so much darkness to light, but it's also ignited a spark of hope. A collective desire to make things right, to create a world where everyone can live with dignity and safety.
It's a long and difficult road ahead, but if we can channel this outrage, this shared sense of purpose into meaningful action, then maybe, just maybe, we can turn this tragedy into a catalyst for lasting change.
I believe we can, because at the end of the day, this isn't just about catching a killer. It's about building a better future, a future where every life is valued, where everyone has the right to feel safe and protected.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity, our interconnectedness. It's about understanding that an injustice against one is an injustice against all.
So as we close this chapter on the Long Island serial killer case, let's remember the victims, their families, and the long, arduous fight for justice.
Let's honor their memory by continuing to ask questions, by challenging the status quo, and by never giving up on the pursuit of a more just and compassionate world.
And for those listening out there, remember, you have a voice. Use it. Speak up for those who can't. Demand better. Because we can and we must do better.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep fighting for the world we want to see.